Girl on the bike with the big bag, New York. I saw you in the morning on the Williamsburg Bridge going into Manhattan from Brooklyn. You were on a Super 73 and we looked into each other's eyes. I had to look back 3 times because you're a true beauty, and then I zoomed off because my bike is faster. What color was my bicycle?
We endure a plethora of interactions every day of varying sizes, often with strangers. They're so frequent and uneventful that most of the time they're soon forgotten about. We tend to filter these out for the meaningful ones and the ones that actually materialize into something, which are more and more often coming from social media these days. But I don't want to talk about social media or the ones that materialize. I want to talk about Craigslist misconnections. The premise of the misconnections section is a place where people can retroactively reach out to someone they ran into in public in hopes of seeing them again. It kind of superseded the newspaper's classified section. However, it's become a bit of an anachronism itself, a site where if you're in on it, you're in on it. And you can trade other anachronisms like a combustion engine or an analog instrument. Speaking of which, I just bought a drum kit on Craigslist a couple months ago for $50. They painted the hardware white for some reason, and I'm still waiting on a symbol though. But the thing that Craigslist does most interestingly is in the misconnection section, and that it bridges the material world and purveys something you couldn't get at any old flea market. You asked me for a cigarette, Medford. Hi, I was on my motorcycle. You were the young, beautiful blonde that asked me for a cigarette. You said my bike was nice and you appreciated it. You were so beautiful you made my heart smile. Let's talk. The misconnection section is simultaneously a remedy to that hopeless, self-loathing feeling in your gut after not doing anything, and a nail in the coffin to the idea of what could have been, which is likely nothing. We tend to want closure only if it's good, otherwise we've been deprived of our fantasy. And it's a common one. This idea of this lucky chance encounter where someone's brave enough to speak up. I was on a train recently and I couldn't help but think of Before Sunrise. So sadly for the misconnections writer, they have to reckon with the substantial loss of charm that comes from retreating home to the laptop and writing a detailed report of the person and place. There's a fine line between observant and obsessive or creepy. The question, what book are you reading, becomes, what book was I reading? And it's not a conversation starter, but a means of making sure you found the right person, and they're not an imposter. And these films that fuel our fantasies become something to watch on the subway, so we don't actually have to engage with our own surroundings. On the flip side of the ones brave enough to bare their soul to the public on Craigslist, we must imagine the system is predicated upon silent spectators of two camps. The quote-unquote target audience being the first, the presumptuous, who may be too meek to write, but just curious enough to check and see if there's an entry about themselves. I don't know if these are fixed positions, but I seem to have found myself in this role involuntarily. Video store, Little Neck, Queens. We were both looking at a video about tools. I told you I had some work that needed to be done at the house, blah, 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 blah. You are a tall Irish guy with blue jeans and a red jacket. Could that have been me? Or could they have mistaken the red jacket for my ubiquitous red sweater and blue jeans combination? And what about this Bedford Duncan man in blue? That could be anyone. Or this Target t-shirt compliment. I have good t-shirts. And what about all these tall, Irish-looking, skinny, tall, white guys, skinny, young boy with old soul? I've been called a kindred spirit. Am I these people?
Midday
Pink
walker,
sweatshirt and Ikea.
Somerset.
Red Hook.
Dave Matthews.
Just
Every
made
day in the
one
early
iPad
afternoon, I
happy
see you
and
walking
you're
past
enjoying
my
the
home
I was
and
in
I'm
the
taking
restaurant
my dog
since
for a walk.
cheese
Last week you said hello.
Today
You waved at me from
Blonde
across
hair,
the street.
white.
You,
Missing the red
nicely
back
built
on
in
the
your early
ground
20s. Me,
Older
older with a full beard. Hit me up. I'd like to know you better.
Green hair girl.
Tell me
Patty
what
was
color
red.
my dog is.
Last couple of
I said hi.
Crushing on the pizza guy.
We talked for a long while.
You make me love milkshake. There was something special about you.
That shot.
I enjoyed your visits. Tell me what you think. Please contact me the way you see
Things have
this.
changed so much.
I was getting chocolate syrup for no particular reason. Happy Thanksgiving. Gobble, gobble. Maybe we can connect.
The second camp is the exploiters. Ones looking for entertainment, artistic material, a good laugh, or otherwise, who mine the entries for their own gain. I found myself in this role voluntarily, but I think it's an equally interesting facet of the phenomenon. It's like reality TV, but more democratic. But there's a shroud of perversity around Craigslist too, isn't there? For people who don't use it, they think it's a place where serial killers and perverts and kidnappers congregate to lure in their next victims. But if you look at it another way, it's just people looking for a connection. I mean, my mom actually teared up when I told her I was making this documentary.
No, loneliness is just too big of a gigantic thing. Loneliness is huge and heart-wrenching. I think that to live in New York, I can remember living in New York and not having a friend. And my boys went away to grad school, and to be alone with 7 million people around you feels like shit. Feel lonely in a big place is with all these people. It's a big deal. Okay, sorry, but I mean it.
It's a good point. Sorry, are you still working on that, or do you want to?
I'll take a box. It's hard to tell, though, with something so broad. Am I waxing poetic about a few meaningless Craigslist ads, or am I just picking low-hanging fruit without considering the actual people behind them? So I thought it best to stop speculating and get some answers from some quote-unquote expert practitioners. So I whipped up a little resendable paragraph to distribute in hopes of finding some willing participants and answering the following questions. 1. Do you do this often? If so, has it ever worked? 2. What was your motivation for writing the ad? 3. Did you tell anyone about your post? 4. Do you ever check this section, either out of curiosity or in hopes of finding an entry about yourself? 5. Would you consider yourself lonely? 6. Would you consider yourself a romantic? 7. How are the relationships in your life? 8. Have you ever used dating apps like Tinder? 9. Do you often approach strangers? 10. What are you looking for? I sent them out unsparingly until I had the irrational fear that they would all contact each other and form a coalition to find and reprimand me. Ironically, the only response I got back was from the first guy I sent it to. Here's what presumably he, said. Well, what can we glean about the whole population with just one answer? Well, first off, we can say that they're persistent little buggers. He's done it 10 times in 20 years to no avail. And you can tell he's a lifer by the way he responds to the second question. The brevity, the use of commas, and most importantly, the suggestive ellipses at the end. Well, doesn't share any misconnections posts, which is interesting to think about how anyone you know could be a routine user, but really, why should he share? I mean, they didn't come to be. It's okay. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. No reason bringing it up. It's an incomplete pass. You just move on. He seems like a pretty normal guy. I mean, he checks out of curiosity from time to time. He's not particularly lonely, according to him, not moderate romantic. He's got good relationships, been on dating apps and got off them. Not opposed to talking to strangers, just looking for something long term. It would seem my mother was right, or at least partially. I mean, there's a whole other camp of people that didn't respond to my email that could probably portray a different image of the site, but I think that's kind of the point. I mean, we can go the Tinder route because we can go anyway. I mean, there are endless avenues. The misconnection section is a microcosm of our world. I mean, it's just a cacophony of interactions stacked on top of each other. We're wading through it all the time, only these people have the decency to go home and write about it, and all they want to do is rectify their wrongs, complete the pass. This action lies between the full exclusion of the real world that social media provides and the full exclusion of technology that romanticism perpetuates, and it exists in the perfect middle ground for a time. A mediation on a web browser that is hardly frequented by many. And you could say that if you both see each other on there, then it really is meant to be. And I'm about to find out. Guy in a hurry, Park Slope. You were running up Fifth Avenue as I was walking down it. You, younger with the sweatshirt with the tiger on it. Me, tall and Irish looking with a camera. We connected for a second. What color was my sweater?